worship the Lord. Worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. If we say that we know him, but we don't keep his word, then we walk in the darkness, and the truth's not in us. If we walk in the light, we will have fellowship sweet, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from sin. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light.
Well, good morning, friends. It is good to be with you this morning. Hopefully you had a fantastic weekend. I know that for me, it was a decent weekend here, and I'm glad to be with you. Oh, and Jacob is out running and listening to us this morning. Hopefully I don't say anything too silly that makes you start laughing and trip and fall down or something like that. I hope, but good for you being out there, Jacob, out on your morning run. And I won't type anything to you because you might not see it, but so, and Donna, I want to ask you the question, how are you feeling? We want to know just how you're feeling. And Marissa is over on the YouTube side of things here, and good to have Marissa with us. Bing, good morning to you, our brother out in the West. How's the air quality out there? I'm seeing posts from different people now. It might be blowing away from you and may not be an issue, but you are out in the West, and I had a friend who lives in Denver who commented about the air quality in Denver. And in fact, it you bring up your weather app and it will tell you so many degrees and this is what the weather forecast is. And hers said 70 degrees and smoke. That's what it said. And so we don't have that here so bad, although there was some haze a week ago or so, and they were saying that was from the fires out west. Incredible fires out west. Bing talking about how hot it is there. We were talking to our kids down in Georgia last night, and they were sitting in their nice, comfortable house at 84 degrees. I was melting just thinking about how warm it was in the house, although they've got this thing about not keeping the air conditioning on and wanting to be heat acclimated, because they do all these competitions and workouts and wrestling events and so on, and lifting events and CrossFit events and things. So they kind of prefer to be kept a little bit uncomfortable to a certain measure. But I couldn't take it. It was too hot. And I don't think I could live out there in the West where you are, or down in the South in Texas. God would really have to pave the way if I were to live in Texas, or the South, I think, like Georgia, Florida, because I just think it'd be, I don't do well in the heat. I don't feel good, really don't feel good physically when it's hot. So, right here in Maine is just fine. The weather's just fine most of the time. So, anyway, just glad to have you along with us. Had a wonderful visit yesterday. Ran into one of our listeners at Hannaford's, and it was great talking to Michael at Hannaford's yesterday. I was kind of focused in, Hannaford's here locally has changed, so trying to find things that you used to know exactly where they were, you have to be a little bit more focused and searching a little bit more. And I was really looking for some of the items that typically are in one place, moved to a different place, but Michael come up and found me. We chatted. It was great talking to you yesterday. Michael, it really was. And I meant every word that I said to you about it. It's meaningful to me. When I see your name here, just an old connection. We played football together, against each other, with each other in high school. Michael was a year ahead of me in school. And so anyway, I did mean that when I see you here, when I see all of you here, it's meaningful. But just going back to that connection from our teenage years all the way till now, and to see what God is doing in our lives is just a wonderful, wonderful thing. What's God doing in your life these days? What is God teaching you? How is God encouraging you? Is there a passage of scripture that you've been mulling over? Those are some questions that I think we need to get put into our minds to be thinking about, because they will enhance our relationship with Christ if we are asking ourselves the question, I wonder what God is wanting to teach me. And what passage can I continue just to turn over and over and over in my mind? Now, I'm going to be completely frank and honest with you. Actually, I'm going to be completely Jim and honest with you. My name is not Frank. Sorry, dumb humor. There are two things I'm mulling over most of the week. Whatever we are studying in the mornings here, and whatever we are studying on the weekend. Those scriptures are the things that I am contemplating. Now, when I was in college, I had friends that would say that you need to separate your devotions from your studies, and to which I said, well, I'm studying theology, I'm studying Bible, we're studying Romans, Corinthians, Galatians, these different books of the Bible. We're doing a survey of the Old Testament, a survey of the New Testament. Why should I do something separate? What I need to do is take what I'm studying and bring application to life. And that's what we do here. I said that yesterday, that we have our devotions together, if you will, in the mornings as we do. And we maybe think a little bit more about what we're looking at and what we're reading. Because of our time together, but to be able to answer the question, if a Christian brother or sister were to come up to you and say, so what's God teaching you lately? How's God speaking to your heart lately? Things of that nature. Just what would you be saying to that friend? So I want to encourage you Or what passage are you in? You might say, well, I'm in Acts, actually. And you could talk about some of the things that we've been studying in Acts. But being prepared, being in a place of being able to say, this is what is going on. I would love to hear, and I don't know if Sandy will do it or not. I'd love to hear or read some of what the learning curve was for the Alaska group, which is now returned home. They're back, and Sandy is back in the Lancaster, Pennsylvania area. And but it would be really something to see what those students said they learned during their trek across Alaska. And I wonder how many of us, now it may take getting in shape a little bit for a few of us, maybe, I don't know. But if you could go, two things I will throw out to you. One is if you could do a weekend retreat where it wasn't focused on all the food and it wasn't focused on all the different games, but was focused on spiritual formation and spiritual disciplines, how many of you would be up for a weekend retreat like that? Yeah, you might do some kayaking, you might take a hike, you might do some things like that, but less about competition and more about connection with God. That's one question. The second question is, if we were to take a trip somewhere and you were to be challenged like these college age students are challenged to have to do a witnessing survey, is that something that you as an adult would say, hey, I would carve a week out of my life to go somewhere? I'd go to Boston, or I would go to Montreal. Maybe that's not a good place. They speak too much French, I think. But you would say, yes, I would like to be pushed in my life in that way. How many of you would say that is me? You can leave that in the comments. Yes, I think a weekend retreat, spiritually focused, I'm game for something like that. Or secondly, I wouldn't mind a backpacking trip like the type of thing we were looking at Sandy Good doing with the college students. So put that in the comments if you would, please. So anyway, we are in the book of Acts. We're in the 21st chapter. We were looking last week at how the Spirit was emulsifying the love in the lives of the people who really didn't want to see Paul go to Jerusalem, but yet Paul had this sense of the tug of the Spirit on his heart to go to Jerusalem, and we talked about the Spirit acting in the love between all the people that Paul administered to and Paul, and the Spirit prompting him to say, try to encourage Paul to not go. Yet Paul really had the sense that he needed to go to Jerusalem. We could ask the question, well, who wasn't listening to God? Well, maybe it's not a case of not listening to God at all. It might just be that the people were in their place of love for Paul, which was Spirit enabled, Spirit engaged, Spirit enacted love. And yet Paul knew he needed to carry the message where he needed to carry it. So that's kind of where we left off last week. We are in Acts chapter 21, verse 17. We're going to jump in there. There we go. I lost the mouse for a moment. Here we go. Acts chapter 21, verse 17. It says, when we arrived at Jerusalem. Now remember, we included Luke, who's the writer here. Luke is the on-the-spot reporter with them and reporting to them, or recording what he is seeing in all the events that are transpiring. So he says, when we arrived at Jerusalem, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. Now remember, the church began in the Jerusalem area. The Apostle James was there as kind of the archbishop of the church, if you will. And the church was strong, yet the church had also been dispersed through persecution, and there were numbers of different believers who had scattered to different places. And yet there was still the core, a hub of the church still in Jerusalem. So it says, the next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James and all the elders who were present. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. When they heard this, they praised God. They said to Paul, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed and how all of them are zealous for the law. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to their customs. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you have come. So do what we tell you. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow. Take these men, join in their purification rites, pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved. Then everyone will know there is no truth in these reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. As for the Gentile believers, we have written them our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, because the blood is still in it, and from sexual immorality. The next day, Paul took the men and purified himself along with them. And he went to the temple to give notice of the date when the days of purification would end, and the offering would be made for each of them. Paul took this directive, Paul took this advice to follow these rites, this purification rite, to demonstrate the fact that he wasn't trying to live outside of Judaism. And in verse 20, it says, you see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed and how all of them are zealous for the law. I mean, there are thousands of people who are believing in Jesus, many of them Jews, lots of them still zealous for the law. There are aspects of the law which should have been maintained, aspects of the law which could be set aside. There was not the necessity of the Gentiles taking up and practicing all of the ceremonial Jewish laws. Civic laws, yes, but not the ceremonial Jewish laws. And yet the Jewish believers would look at Paul and say, well, you are living kind of like a hellion, or you are living kind of like, this is interesting. Becky says, wrong book up. Well, I'm not realizing that, very interesting that, wow. Well, I'm talking. Everybody else hearing me okay? Maybe what you do is log out and log back in. Well, you can't hear what I'm saying. Close out and come back in. See if that helps. Everybody else has sound, right? All good there. Okay. But I just realized Becky says wrong book up. I'm looking at my screen. This is interesting. Let me kill this desktop capture. I'll close it and I'm going to add it back in and see what happens here. See if we have the right book open now. There. That was interesting. Something changed on my computer yesterday, and anyway, we're back. We've got the right text up there. We are looking at, thank you, Becky. I was like, what are you talking about? But then I looked and went, yeah, you're exactly right. I get it now. So here we go. We are in Acts 21. My apologies, folks. I'm looking at my big screen, not the little screen that's in front of me, and my big screen has the right passage on it, but the way the desktop capture, it was capturing something old for some reason. But we're all good now. The truths that they had, sorry, we're a little choppy this morning, I guess. The truths that we see here are there were civil laws that everybody's to apply, ceremonial laws that applied specifically to the Jews. Paul, being Jewish, took this right and applied these rights, these purification rights, verse 24, along with some other men to show that, no, I'm not trying to live outside the law. I'm not trying to live above the law. And out of this, Paul will make the statement in 1 Corinthians 9, I seek to be all things to all men, that by all means I might see, that I might win some. That was what Paul practiced. J. Hudson Taylor, missionary to China, when he moved to China, he started dressing like the Chinaman. He cut his hair and had the beard like the Chinaman. He ate like the Chinaman. He wanted to be like the Chinaman. Now, sometimes in our day, with all this racial conversation that is there, you don't know what you should do sometimes. But and I'm not necessarily advocating that if you're going to have ministry to people who are tattooed, that you need to get tattoos, although there are people that get tattoos because that's the culture in which they live, work, minister. I minister among you. Some of our folks have tattoos, some don't have tattoos. Shaving the head, well, I'm already partway there, so that wouldn't be such a big deal. Or taking on some of the customs. Sometimes it's entirely appropriate to take on the customs of people, and other times it would be better if we did not take on their customs. So I just want to encourage you that you don't have to take on all the Jewish customs. We have, among us, we have some who practice some of the Judaistic practices, observe the Judaistic holidays, the Hebraic holidays, look at the Hebrew calendar, because it points to Christ. But that doesn't mean that they are being legalistic. It doesn't mean that they are being, in fact, in some ways, it perhaps draws them closer because they have to think on these dual tracks of, okay, this is what the Jewish teaching was and how does it reflect Christ? And it really can be a deepening experience if you will go down that road. But Paul, becoming all things to all men so that by all means he might win some. And that's for us to think about, how do we meet people where they are? Sometimes it's like, well, you need to become like me if I'm going to minister to you. Well, no. How do we minister to those around us? How do we be like them enough? It'd be like, I'm in a culture now where, and I have been for almost 11 years, a culture that, men typically don't wear suits and ties and things to this church. A few times I've donned a sport coat, and even I wonder a little bit if that's a little bit much for our area. You need to be able to relate with the area that is around you, the culture in which you're living, as long as it doesn't cross some sinful line. If this were a nudist colony, that would be crossing a line. That is not, at least in my opinion, I think a biblical opinion, that is not a place that I would want to go, or dressing in some way that's provocative and drawing attention to self and away from God. Those things might be bad things, and we have to ask ourselves those questions. But so if I'm around farm folk, I'll talk about farm things. If I'm around suburban folk, I might talk about suburban things. There's a different vibe that you have in Morrill, Maine versus what you might have in Portland, Maine, or even a different vibe in what you have in Morrill, Maine as to what you might have in Belfast, Maine. Learning how to meet people where they are, to be somebody that is relatable. And that's what Paul was doing here. He followed the advice that was given to him by the leader of the church in Jerusalem, who was James. Now, let's continue on down through the text here as I'm trying to still wake up, apparently. It says in verse 27, it says, when the 7 days were nearly over, some Jews from the province of Asia saw Paul at the temple. They stirred up the whole crowd and seized him, shouting, fellow Israelites, help us! This is the man who teaches everyone everywhere against our people and our law in this place. And besides, he has brought Greeks into the temple and defiled the holy place. It says they had previously seen Trophimus, the Ephesian, in the city with Paul and assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple. So the whole city was aroused, and the people came running from all directions. Seizing Paul, they dragged him from the temple, and immediately the gates were shut. While they were trying to kill him, news reached the commander of the Roman troops that the whole city of Jerusalem was in an uproar. At once he took some officers and soldiers and ran down to the crowd. When the rioters saw the commander and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. The commander came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. Then he asked who he was and what he had done. Some of the crowd shouted one thing and some another, and since the commander could not get at the truth because of the uproar, he ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. When Paul reached the steps, the violence of the mob was so great he had to be carried by the soldiers. The crowd that followed kept shouting, get rid of him. I mean, Paul was one that could stir it right up, just like Jesus. I mean, the crowds were shouting for Jesus many years before this. I don't remember what year we're in. I think we're in probably the late 80s, 50s, maybe in the 80s, 60s by now, perhaps. I'm not talking the 50s and 60s, like 1950s and 60s that a few of you might remember. I'm talking the 80s. There is nothing in front of it, 50s and 60s. But they didn't like Paul because Paul brought the message of Jesus. They didn't like Paul because Paul was leading people, even many of the Jewish people, leading them to a newfound faith in Jesus Christ. So that stirred up the city, so much so it says while they were trying to kill him. Now this is the very type of thing that the Roman leadership didn't want to see happen. This is the very thing that the Roman leadership always feared were these uprisings among the Jews. So there was already the tension there, the tension between the Roman rulers and the Roman military, the Roman police, if you will, and the Jewish people. The Jewish people felt the oppression of the Romans, and so there was the tension that was there. And the Jews, the Romans always were on their guard and always had their concern of Jewish uprisings. And this is exactly what this looks like. But really what you're seeing here is the uprising between Judaism and Christianity. And now the Romans needed to get involved. So now you kind of have a 3-way thing going on. You have the Jewish people, you have the Romans, and now you have the Christians. Most notably, you have the Apostle Paul. And the crowd was shouting one thing, and they were shouting another thing. The ruler could not get at. Says that the commander could not get at the truth because of the uproar. So Paul ordered that Paul be taken into the barracks. And when Paul reached the steps, the violence of the mob was so great he had to be carried by the soldiers. Just picture the scene as it's happening there, and this revolt and this riot and this shouting. And sometimes once you get a mob going, it doesn't matter what the circumstance is. What matters is that there is a riot that is happening. Some people will jump into a riot and have no idea why they're there. It's just, hey, this is good. And it could be an entirely bogus situation. It could be an entirely bad situation. It could be things that should not be happening. But people just kind of get sucked right into it. And that's exactly what happens. So much so that the city itself came into an uproar because of the Apostle Paul. Continuing and finishing out this chapter, it says, as the soldiers were about to take Paul into the barracks, he asked the commander, "May I say something to you?" And he says, "Do you speak Greek?" And he was kind of surprised that Paul spoke Greek. And the man says, "Aren't you an Egyptian who started a revolt and led 4,000 terrorists out into the wilderness some time ago?" And Paul said, "No, I am a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no ordinary city. And please let me speak to the people." After receiving the commander's permission, Paul stood on the steps and motioned to the crowd. When they were all silent, he said to them in Aramaic. Now, here we see Paul. Paul is speaking Greek. Paul is speaking Aramaic. I mean, Paul was Jewish, but he also had Greek roots. He lived in this part of Turkey, Tarsus, over toward Turkey, and kind of maybe the mixing of the languages. And as we've noted before, oftentimes people who are in Europe have several different languages that they speak. I think my daughter-in-law speaks 5 languages, or at least can communicate in 5 languages. I know she's pretty fluent in maybe 3 or 4 languages, but they just have that ability because of all the crossing over of through travel and all those things, and then all the migrating that took place in those days, as there were so many different dynasties coming and going, and people migrated and fought, and wars and all those different things. So now we see Paul speaking in another language to the people. Now, it's somewhat amazing to think that he gave Paul the opportunity to speak, because he could have just said, "Look, if I'm going to let you speak, you're just going to stir the crowd up even more, and I'm going to have even more of a problem." But Paul goes ahead and he speaks to the people. He says, "Brothers and fathers, listen to my defense." When they heard him speak to them in Aramaic, they became very quiet. And Paul said, "I am a Jew, born of Tarsus of Cilicia, brought up in this city. I studied under Gamaliel." Now, Gamaliel was one of the most well-known rabbis, most well-known professors, and well-known and well-loved professors in the day. So he said, "I studied under this well-known professor, this well-known rabbi, and was thoroughly trained in the law of our ancestors. I was just as zealous for God as any of you are today." And that is absolutely true. In fact, if you go over to Philippians, the 3rd chapter, Paul gives his pedigree. Paul talks about about his background. He gives his CV, if you will, or his resume, provides his credentials in Philippians chapter 3. And that's what he's getting to here. So you see the connection between what Paul says here and what he said in Philippians 3. He had to defend himself here, and so that found its way into his writings as well. He says, "I persecuted the followers of this way to their death, arresting both men and women and throwing them into prison, as the high priest and all the council can themselves testify." I mean, they should have been able to testify to this fact. They knew who he was. He says, "I even obtained letters from them to their associates in Damascus, and went from there to bring these people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished." I mean, these Jewish leaders knew what Paul was doing. These Jewish leaders knew his background. He had been one of them, and he's saying, "Look, let them speak. Let them tell you who I am." In fact, here are the letters. Ask them about the letters that I obtained, that I might bring people as prisoners to Jerusalem to be punished. Now he shares his testimony. He says this. He says that about noon, as I came near Damascus, suddenly a bright light from heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Who are you, Lord? I asked. I am Jesus of Nazareth, whom you are persecuting, he replied. My companions saw the light, but they did not understand the voice of him who was speaking to me. What shall I do, Lord? I asked. Get up, the Lord said, and go to Damascus. There you will be told all you have been assigned to do. My companions led me by the hand into Damascus because of the brilliance of the light that had blinded me. A man named Ananias came to me. He was a devout observer of the law and highly respected by all the Jews living there. He stood beside me and said, Brother Saul, receive your sight. At that very moment, I was able to see him. Then he said, the God of our ancestors has chosen you to know his will and to see the righteous one and to hear the words from his mouth. You will be his witness to all the people of what you have seen and heard. And now what are you waiting for? Get up, be baptized, wash your sins away, calling on his name. And when I returned to Jerusalem and was praying in the temple, I fell into a trance and saw the Lord speaking to me. Quick, he said, leave Jerusalem immediately, because the people here will not accept your testimony about me. Lord, I replied, I know that I went from one synagogue to another to imprison and beat those who believe in you. And when the blood of your martyr Stephen was shed, I stood there giving my approval and guarding the clothes of those who were killing them. Then the Lord said to me, go, I will send you far away to the Gentiles. And so Paul is sharing his testimony. And not only his testimony of salvation, but even the testimony of his call to ministry. And what Paul had been sanctioned, not only sanctioned, but sent by the Lord to go and to do. Now, I got a question for you. How nimble are you? How quick are you at sharing your testimony? We need to practice with each other. We've done some here. When we went to breakfast a few Fridays ago, we got to share some testimonies there. We need to have a barbecue or something at my house sometime very soon. And again, I would encourage us to be able to share our testimonies. If we can't share our testimonies with believers, how will we ever share our testimonies with non-believers? Paul was nimble. Now, I mean, it doesn't take rocket science to realize that Paul was quite astute and that Paul was quite articulate. And I am nowhere nearly as astute and as articulate as the Apostle Paul was. And you might say, well, Pastor Jim, I'm not nearly as articulate when it comes to spiritual things as you are. No, but if we would all say, Lord, help us to define and refine and practice and know our testimony, then we might be more ready and more apt to be able to share Christ with other people that we come in contact with. Now, the Alaska crew that just returned, that we've talked about and prayed for, they had a tool that they used. They had a survey. I think it was a world religion survey. I need to see if I can get a copy of that. I'd like to see it. We used to do those when I was in college. Sandy Good in Sanford Good, Dr. in Sanford Good, was the chairman of the missions department when I was in school. And he was one of the crazy people in a good way. He would take people out witnessing and take us out in the streets of Lancaster, and he would lead missions trips and all these things. And one of the things that we got taught how to use was a survey to get into conversations with people. But what if you don't have that prerogative? What if it is you're dealing with a client? What if it is that you're dealing with a coworker? What if it is that you're dealing with somebody, you're standing in line somewhere? And, how nimble are you at being able to share how Christ called you into salvation? So I'm going to say hola to Hank and Lori. Hank and Lori got a few days away here, long weekend, and so I'm hoping that it's been a good day. Today's another one of those days, if I understand correctly, and I want to encourage you to enjoy that time. It's important to find that time. You need that time. So I was just telling somebody yesterday, for me, I was talking with somebody about burnout, and I said one of the things that right now in my life I need to do is I need to get out in the woods frequently. It's good for my soul. It's good for my mind. What good is it if I sit here in the office and work on different things if I am a wreck and not mentally, spiritually, emotionally where I need to be? And sometimes one of the things that we need to do, and I have not been good about this, is getting away. I need to push away more frequently. So here in a few weeks, I'll be going to Georgia. Then in October, going to Washington State, all with my kids. But then also would like to schedule some other times away. Really want to go to Israel, and I'm going to miss a trip to Israel here in October because I'm going to be out in Washington. I really want to go. I've got different friends that take trips regularly. Would like to go. I'd like to take some of you too. So Lori's back to work today. Well, if I wasn't on my computer and I could draw a sad face, but you enjoyed the botanical gardens, and that was a good thing. So glad for you to get away at least a little bit like that and enjoy some scenery. Back to the testimonies. Paul shared his testimony here in Acts chapter 22. He talked about the change in his life. Sometimes people say, well, we shouldn't go back and share all about our past. Well, sometimes sharing some of our past touches a person where they are. There are people that I've talked to along the way as I shared my testimony that have been encouraged to open up and share things about their own lives they've never shared with anybody. So I would attest that God has used my testimony to help other people begin to deal with and process some things in their lives that maybe they've never processed and dealt with in their life before. So to share some of that, Paul shared about his past. Now, he had a stellar past in terms perhaps of his, he was not a ungodly man. Paul perhaps was what made Paul ungodly was perhaps his sense of self-righteousness that perhaps made Paul ungodly. But in terms of following the law and the code and the morality and all those things, he did very, very well. So his testimony about those things, my testimony was, I was involved in drugs and alcohol and sexuality and all kinds of things in my teenage years. Paul would say, no, I was involved in going to Levite school, or I was involved in Hebrew school, or I was involved in, becoming the strongest, best, most articulate defender of the truth of the Torah that I could be. That might be Paul's testimony. And then his testimony went on to talk about how he arrested people and was there as people were killed. But then how God got a hold of him and then sent him to share the message of the gospel with the Gentiles. Now it says this in verse 22. The crowd was listening intently, it would seem, until he got to the point where he said, where he said, the Lord said to me, go, I will send you to the Gentiles. The crowd listened to Paul until he said this. Then they raised their voices and shouted, rid the earth of him. He's not fit to live. And as they were shouting and throwing off their cloaks and flinging dust in the air, it sounds like children, don't they? It says the commander ordered that Paul be taken to the barracks. He directed that he be flogged and interrogated in order to find out why people were shouting at him like this. As they stretched him out to flog him, Paul said to the centurion standing there, is it legal for you to flog a Roman citizen who has not even been found guilty? When the centurion heard this, he went to the commander and reported it. "What are we going to do?" he asked. "This man is a Roman citizen." The commander went to Paul and asked, "Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?" "Yes, I am," he answered. Then the commander said, "I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship." "But I was born a citizen," Paul replied. Those who were about to interrogate him withdrew immediately. The commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. I mean, something about citizenship. Now, one of the things that comes to my mind reading this section is the whole argument and debate over immigration and laws and rights. And, sometimes when you fill out forms, like some medical forms you might have to fill out, or if you're applying for a car loan, or there's a number of different things where you may fill out forms. You're applying for a mortgage because you're going to help Fran's going to help you buy a house or something like that. There might be forms you have to fill out, and they may ask you for citizenship. Well, here Paul was able to say, look, I'm not an immigrant. I'm from Turkey. I'm from a part of Rome. This is Roman territory. Yes, I'm Jewish, perhaps in my background and in my heritage, but I was born a Roman citizen. And obviously the law stated that it was illegal for them to treat a Roman citizen as Paul himself was being treated. So it says the commander himself was alarmed when he realized that he'd put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. There's a problem. Verse 22 says the commander wanted to find out exactly why Paul was being accused by the Jews. So the next day he released him and ordered the chief priests and all the members of the Sanhedrin to assemble. Then he brought Paul and had them stand before them. Now I'm going to stop there for today, I think. We will pick up tomorrow in chapter 23, where Paul begins to give his defense before the Sanhedrin and before all the various chief priests. The commander was a Roman commander. He was not a Jewish commander overseeing the legions of the temple guard. No, these are actually Roman soldiers who are in the midst of this. They're the peacekeepers. They are the ones who keep law and order. And so the commander brings Paul before the council. Now think of the opportunities that Paul has. Jesus had said, look, you're going to have the opportunity to go declare me before kings and before princes and before all kinds of different people. And Paul is actually getting the opportunity to declare Christ before all kinds of people. He will have an audience in Rome eventually. Now, it wasn't under the circumstances where he was invited to be the house guest. No, the circumstances he is being he's under arrest for the uprising that took place in Jerusalem. But nonetheless, he will get to carry the gospel message all the way to Rome, a place that he's not yet been, and he will get to go all the way back. So yes, coming full circle, as Fran is noting here. It says, Nell said, our story is really God's story. It tells how awesome, victorious, loving, and forgiving he is, how merciful, how gracious, how patient he is. Now, those are not things that Nell said. I added that to the mix because God is all those things to us. So I have an assignment for you. If you've never done this assignment, get yourself a tablet. I have one here. Get yourself a tablet, like a legal pad or a notebook or something like that. And I want to encourage you to write out your testimony. What you were like before you came to Christ. Now, you might not have such a dark, cloudy testimony as I do. Yours might be much cleaner testimony than mine was, but nonetheless, you came to the realization of your need for Christ. So, life before Christ. What steps were involved in bringing you to Christ? Like, was it a friend? Was it an older woman that took you to church? Thinking of Fran's testimony. Was it a Billy Graham thing? Was it a vacation Bible school? Was it a Christian camp? Or what steps? For me, there were many steps. I started attending a church, months and months before I became a Christian. But God began whittling away at me by creating a curiosity within me for spiritual things. And then through my friend Mark Alwas and his witness to me, then his family's witness to me, then going to a Christian concert. And then after you get through how you became a Christian, talk about how God has changed your life, or how God has been working in your life, how he's been growing you, and maybe even currently, what's God doing in your life right now? I want to challenge you. I want to encourage you, whether it is on a legal pad, like what we have here, or a notebook, or you might even choose to write it out on your computer and type it out. And if you do that, that might be something that you might be able to come back and to share here. Post it, share it. I would love for us to be able to sit and just share our testimonies. That's part of being equipped to be able to make a difference for Christ in our world. So anyway, friends, I know maybe a little bit disheveled this morning. I'm tired today. Shouldn't be, but I am. And so I want to get you into your day. Again, challenge you. Think about writing out your testimony before Christ, how you came to Christ, what God's been doing in your life ever since, and maybe even a current word about what God is doing in your life right now. So maybe 3 to 4 parts of that testimony exercise. I just want to encourage you to do that. So, friends, I'm going to pray for you, get you into your day. I've got to put an IV of coffee in here, I think, today. Lord, thank you for the time we could spend together. I pray for my friends that as they get into their day, that they would meet with you, that you would meet with them, that you would encourage them, that you would bless them, that you would make your gracious face to shine upon them, that you would give them peace today. In Christ's name, amen. Well, friends, I'm going to get you into your day, and I will see you again tomorrow. Remember, tonight, ladies, at 6:30, there is a gathering for women to pray. They pray for each other. They pray for us. They pray for the church. They pray for the world. You might say, well, I'm not comfortable with that, or I have never done something like that. Well, I encourage you, take a step of faith. Remember, faith has feet. Take a step of faith, perhaps, and say, okay, I might not say anything, but I'm going to go and listen in and learn how to do this. Great opportunity to learn, to grow, to engage. Hey, friends, have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow.